If you don't mind, take out your phone and share this with your Facebook group, or maybe invite somebody specific when we get online here. Matt, are we there yet? Yes. All right, we are there. So I'm going to see if it shows up. We'll share this. Good morning to everyone joining us here at Radcliff Christian in person, and everyone that's joining us online. I'm Britt McDowell. I'm the minister here, and hopefully you'll have the opportunity to come and visit with us sometime. It's awesome to see that as our congregation is sharing this and sending it out and or saving it for later, to know that putting these things out there is making a difference. We have people that are interacting on a daily basis with the page, and you know, if you have the chance, if you're following everything, if you can like and comment and share things, that helps do that also. Because you know, we all have people that we may not reach in person, but we can do those things electronically. I actually had a friend in England, somebody that knew me on Facebook from back in my networking days, that we started posting the sermon clips, and she had questions. And so I just tell you, your efforts equal reach for sure. So this week is week 4 of a 5-part series, that's completely not how I do things, but I think it's worked out so far so good, based on the relationships that we have as believers. And so with those relationships, we look at them. The first week, these are based on a Chinese philosopher named Confucius and his 5 relationships for a harmonious life. And for a Christian, or for a believer, the first one is your relationship between you and Christ, between Christ our King and the believer. Him being the Messiah sent to deliver us and reconcile us to the Father in that process. Week 2 was our relationships as believers with our neighbors. How we get along with those that are lovable, they may not be lovable, those that we like, maybe those that we don't know. And you know, it always begs the question, who is my neighbor? And well, I think Jesus answered that with the parable of the Good Samaritan. Everybody is your neighbor. And then last week we talked about siblings in Christ. Now that's where we really have the lovable versus the unlovable, because we know our siblings. That's us as a congregation, but then that's also congregation to congregation. And you know, we kind of talked about how do we handle things when we agree and then when we disagree. Because I don't know about y'all, but I've kind of come to the conclusion there's a lot of disagreeable people out there. There is contention, and it's not hard to find. This week, speaking of contention, we're going to deal with the spouse-to-spouse relationships and what that means for our families and what that means for us as individuals. Some of us are fortunate that we have spouses, and some of us are fortunate that we don't have spouses. You know, Jesus says there are some people that are never meant to enter into that partnership. And so it goes there. But before we get into that, I got some Confucian words of wisdom for you this morning. And these are in order of least important to important. So, number 1, man who eats ice cream in car is a Sunday driver. As Steve drops his head. Number 2, man who sits on tack gets the point. And number 3, war doesn't determine who is right. It determines who is left. That's important because I don't know this for sure. But for those of us that have spouses, there's no way you've ever had a war in your house. No, surely not. So just remember, war doesn't determine who's right, it determines who's left. In every relationship, there is a reacher and there is a settler. And if you want to have a good conversation, ask your spouse which one they are. Who's the reacher and who's the settler? I said that one time to Michelle, and I almost got a black eye. I told her she had to be here today because she's the focal point of several jokes that are written into the sermon, so she needed to be here to defend herself, to go with it. Because if I'd have done these when she's not here, I'd have really heard about it later. But let's go back to the question: how did you pick your spouse? How did you know they were the one? There's a lot of answers to that. Was it looks? Was it compatibility? Maybe they were the only one offering. That would be desperation. Or maybe you were the only one dumb enough to say yes. You know, that's naivety. I always tell the joke that I bamboozled Michelle. She came along at a point in my life. I had 2 kids, and I was kind of a single dad, had a lot of things going on. That was not the life she was looking for. But the curly top back there was the deal sealer. When she met George, it was done. Thanks, George. If you ask my wife what my endearing trait is, she's not going to say it's my dashing good looks or my wit or my intellect. She's going to say it's my consistency. Well, you are my helpmate, so we'll just leave it at that. But she said I was one of the most consistent people she knew. And when I met Michelle, the thing that bedazzled me the most was her potential. And I saw the potential for high blood pressure, stress, gray hair, all the things that go with it. But I love the fact about Michelle is that she was a person that focused on growth, and that I saw where she was and I saw where she could go. And that and consistency put together a relationship that none of our friends thought would work, that none of our friends thought was a good idea. We had 40 mutual friends and nobody introduced us. There's no way that will work. And well, we're 15 years in, so we're doing all right. We don't work on opposites attract. We work on opposing forces balance each other. But for those of you with your spouse, I ask those questions. You know, do that inventory. You know, what was there? What brought it together? You don't have to share, but maybe you can tell us a little bit later something. You know, tell me individually. You know, Steve and Carla have a great story. They shared it with Michelle and I one night at dinner. But you think about that, and there are some people that goes, well, I'm never getting married. Why would I want to get married? And so, or why would I want to have a spouse? And you know, this is one of those hot button issues with the church, because you've always got some people. I love the crowd that they talked about the sanctity of biblical marriage, and they want to stand up there and tell what they think is right and who should get married and who shouldn't. And they're 3 divorces in, working on number 4. They have done nothing other than they're using the sanctity of marriage as a way to beat up and batter somebody else that they don't agree with or they don't like or whatever. And so when I ask the question, what is the purpose of marriage? Number 1 is companionship. And that goes back to, and the reason that this is printed instead of handwritten is because I have a variety of Bible verses that we're going to use, and so it was easier to copy and paste the Bible verses than it was to write them out. I learned that halfway through as I was writing it this week. So and then I had to, you know, then you had Britt paraphrases, so this was the easy way to do it. And so Genesis 2:24 says, "That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh." When you have that person in your life, it's an all-in situation. It's not 50-50. Anybody that tells you that marriage is 50-50 hadn't been there or hadn't done it right, because it's 100% by both people. In that understanding that unity together is something special. It is what will allow you to do so much. The second reason why you need a spouse is it creates a partnership. Ecclesiastes 4:9-12, 2 are better than one, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. We are built for companionship. We are built for partnership. And a great example of this is a draft horse, big workhorse. By itself, a workhorse can lift 8,000 pounds with the right pulley, and we're not going to turn this into a Newtonian physics lesson. But it can lift 8,000 pounds. So then it makes common sense then, if you were to have 2 horses, you could lift 16,000 pounds. But that's not the case. That when you have 2 horses working together in synergy on the same mission, it doesn't double their efforts. It quadruples or 5X's their efforts. That a pair of horses together could lift as much as 32,000 to 50,000 pounds working together. And so that's what your marriage and with your spouse should be like. Why is that the case? Number 1, you have a common goal. You're working towards something together. I call that synchronicity. You have familiarity. You know what your partner's going to do. That horse, when they work together, they know what they're going to do and how they're going to put out, so it allows them to overachieve. Guys, there are a lot of you here in this room right now, you are overachieving because of your spouse. And then there's a lot of people that have things that they don't have, that they have because of their spouse. That partnership provides encouragement. It provides a shared burden, a place of trust. And also it reminds you of performance, because there's some of those relationships, they don't want to be outworked by the other person. But that's why their synergy, coming together, allows them to do 3, 4, 5 times as much. The third reason why your spouse is a blessing. Proverbs 18:22 says that he who finds a wife finds what is good and receives favor from the Lord. And so as we look at those things and those ideas, with the right mindset, we see how in the home, in that partnership, great things can be accomplished. We see that hopefully your spouse brings out the best in you. Hopefully they are patient and they're kind and they deal with the worst of you as well. Because it's a full spectrum task. I make no bones about it. I tease Michelle, but I'm going to tell you, she's very patient. I'm very patient. She's very stubborn. I'm very stubborn. But that's part of the reason why we work. Those similarities allow us to do a lot of things together and accomplish a lot of things. And we've built I had no idea the level of life that we had built together where we are now. And I think a lot of the people that have went through that in life can say the same thing. But, there's always a but. When you start to look at that relationship, it's just like any of the other relationships. We have to foster, we have to nurture, we have to put in, we have to love, we have to do the things that make it work. You know, and you hear this in a lot of weddings in Corinthians 13:4-7. This is where you hear the love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it's not self-seeking, it's not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrong. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. And that's the blueprint. That's the model that was given to us by Christ. There's a lot of the references, you go on a little bit later into Ephesians, and Paul references how Christ did those things for the church. Now, I'm not a counselor by any means, but I said something earlier that I think is true, that when both people are 100% committed in that relationship, that's where the overachievement begins. Now, we live in a world today where there are fewer people getting married. There are fewer people that are having families. There are more people that are isolated. There are more people that they just don't see the need. And when you talk about putting 2 names on a piece of paper and having a legally binding contract, that's formidable. I can see where it can intimidate some people, especially in with the generations that are coming along, where I don't want to say they have commitment issues, but they have picking issues. I think we all know, and I think some of us are guilty of it. We sit there and we go on Netflix or whatever, and I watch previews. I like previews more than actually watching shows. There's no commitment to it, right? You just kind of scroll and go through that. But as the church, specifically those of us that are in those relationships and we have people around us, we need to understand what our example says. We need to understand what our relationship with our spouse says. Are we showing the love of Christ? Because ultimately, if that's what we're called to do, is to go out into the world and make disciples, teach people what Christ taught us, love our neighbors ourselves, love God and serve and honor Him in those ways, that puts us under a microscope. That's a challenge. And it's easy to be distracted, and it's easy to step offline, and it's easy to disappoint or let down those that love us the most. But they're the world, the people that don't know Christ. They're watching us too. Now, I'm going to, the reading that I want to really get to scripturally in Ephesians starts with verse 21. But verse 22 is probably the most resented marriage verse in the Bible. It says, wives, it says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So that's pretty easy to take, that in our relationships, the way we treat our partner should be the model that Christ established. Heal them, serve them, love them, forgive them, selflessly. But here's a clobber verse that says, verse 22, it says, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do the Lord. But they just said the same thing the verse before, but they wanted to reemphasize the wives. That's a little bit of that patriarchy kind of sneaking in there. Go down to verse 25. Ephesians chapter 5:25 says, husbands, love your wife just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up to her to make her holy, cleansing her by washing with water through the word, and to present himself as a radiant church. Now that's not the commandment to wives. That's the commandment to believers, because it says that's because we are Christ's bride. The church is Christ's wife. So that's all of us. Be without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body just as Christ does the church. For we are members of his body. Then a repeat for the man for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united with his wife, and two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. Now here's a verse that just kind of goes in there. It says, and this is one of those makes me scratch my head and say, what the heck? However, each one of you must also love his wife as he loves himself. And I think that there should be the wife should love her husband like she loves herself. But it just says that the wife's supposed to respect the husband. I think that's a little little thumb in the side there, because guys, if you're loving your wife like you love yourself, she's going to do more than respect you. If you love your spouse, your partner, whatever you've got in your life in those relationships, if you're going above and beyond, they will as well. And that's the beauty of what we have. Marriage is a sacrificial partnership. And I know there's you have the group that says, well, marriage is one man and one woman, and I don't subscribe to that. Marriage is your partnership with who you're going to share your life with, who you're going to build your life with, who's going to be there for you and who you're going to be there for. And I think we've all seen crazy examples of things that shouldn't work that do, and things that they're supposed to work that don't. But when we focus on that relationship, and we focus on not where we are, but where we're going, with the proper esteem, doing everything we can to be Christ-like. I think that's how you find your success. And that's how we can show that to those that are around us. I said a little earlier that marriage is not a 50-50, it's a 100-100. All in. And when I was a young man, I heard a story. It was an old-timer. And he said, if you want to make things work and do great things. Now I realize that this is not an up-and-coming class. Most of you, you've mastered this already, but this is that it's still, I hope you understand the encouragement that you can give those that are struggling and learning. Some of you have experiences that is so golden that people need to hear it. But the old-timer was an old preacher, and he was getting ready to marry a couple, and they had already had their house, and they were ready to go. And he said, so before the wedding, I want you to go, and he's like, I want you to get a 100-foot rope. And he tells the husband, he said, I want you to take that 100-foot rope, and I want you to throw it over the house. So it's draped over the house. He says, then I want you to go on one side, and I want your wife to go on the other side, and I want you to start pulling. And whoever pulls the other one over the house gets to be in charge. And the guy was worried because he was marrying a workhorse. I mean, she was a strong farm girl. He was a little worried because he's a little scrawny guy. But they went, and for hours they pulled back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And they got ready to get married. And they went back for their last counseling session, and the preacher said, well, how'd it go? Who won? Well, we couldn't do it. Nobody won. It was a draw. He said, okay. He's like, so before your marriage, he's like, I want you to go back, and he's like, I want you both to get on the same side and pull the rope over and see what happens. They pulled it just right over. And it was the reminder of that the synergy and the working together, that when you have that goal together, the strength is there. You know, a lot of people want to use some of those clobber verses to talk about that marriage should be dominated by the man. He's the head, and the wives should submit to him. And that's just simply not the way it goes, because guys, don't forget, in the marriage of the bride to Christ, we're all the bride. And that when we treat those that we're in that commitment with and in that sacred space with, as we want to be treated, as we love them as we love ourselves, it's amazing the compromises and the success that can be made. Now I know there's a guy sitting somewhere says that's not how it is. I run things. And it reminds me of another old time story that I heard. I was 9 years old, and I was sitting at my mom's restaurant at the table of knowledge. It's a round table. About 10 guys would sit around every morning and every afternoon, and they'd talk about life. I learned more there than anything I ever should have. And this one guy was talking about how he told it was going to be, and he's lying there. And this old guy he was actually the second state trooper in the state of Kentucky, looked at me. His name was Buck. He goes, Britt, he goes, I want to tell you a very valuable lesson. I said, what's that? He said, well, there's two types of men in this world. He said, there's henpecked and there's liars, and you get to pick which one you're going to be. So we know that those guys that were talking hard weren't loving their wives as they love themselves. But I commend those of you here for the example that you're setting for our church, for our community, the things that you've accomplished. And they're a testament to Christ's love for us, just as it is for our loves for our partners and for our spouses. And so as we move forward next week, we're going to talk about spouses a little bit more. We're going to talk about the home and the relationships that are there, from the parent to child is our last relationship of this. And the special relationship is that'll be special because next week it'll be Mother's Day. But I want to encourage you, those of you that are doing a great job, there's a lot of you that are. And don't be afraid to share that with people. Don't be afraid to be that encouragement. And continue to be the example that you are. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for our time here today, and thank you for those people that you've put into our lives. They may not be here now, but the testament that we've had and the things that we've seen and the lives that were built and the testaments to your love are so impressive. And I just ask that this week, that as we finish up here and we go out into the world, that we remember the love that we have for our partners, and that we show that. And we remember that it should be modeled after the love that Christ has for his church. In your Son's holy name, amen.